All right, guys, so we are going to go over the biomolecule section. Now, remember this, everything that I put inside of this review is important and in some way, shape, or form is going to appear on the test. So I give you the general idea to understand so that you can take that and apply it to a bunch of different questions. Question number one says, what is a monomer? Now, what is a monomer? What is a monomer? Okay, we've talked about this in many, many ways in different times. But what we need to remember from monomers, a monomer is a building block. It is a building block. It is a building block. And what do they build? They build polymers. Now, let's break down the word monomer. Monomer means one building block because mono means one. And if you want to, and I recommend you do, you could take these down as additional notes to help you out because every time that you write something down, you just remember it a little bit better. So remember, let's write down monomer and let's circle mono because mono means one. One. So monomer is one building block. And with that said, let's go into the second one. What is a polymer? Well, poly means many. So many building blocks. So if I showed you just one building block, you would tell me that's a monomer. Now, if I took a bunch of them, they were the same, they looked exactly the same, and I stuck them together, that would be a polymer because it'd be a bunch of those one building blocks put together to make a long chain. Now, we have these things called biomolecules, which we have written right here under question number 3. What are biomolecules? Remember this, and this is very important. Our biomolecules are considered polymers. They are considered polymers simply because biomolecules are made out of monomers. So say it with me. Biomolecules are considered polymers. Biomolecules are considered polymers. Biomolecules are considered polymers. They are considered that because they're made out of monomers. They are considered that because they're made out of monomers. They are considered that because they're made out of monomers. Now we have four biomolecules. Four biomolecules. If you don't remember them exactly, here we go. We have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. Those are our four biomolecules. And the first three are actually really easy to remember because carbohydrates are going to be things like bread or corn or potato, things like that. Your lipids are just your fat. So just think about fat, juicy fat. And then your proteins, well, that's any kind of meat or fish or things like that. Now, nucleic acids are the one that people get confused, and you really shouldn't because nucleic acid, I want you to think about DNA. DNA, because DNA, the Na stands for nucleic acid. So those are our four biomolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. Now, here we go. We have to match the monomers to the appropriate biomolecules. So these are a bunch of different monomers. These are the biomolecules. We have to match them. So for carbohydrates, the answer is actually going to be, well, I clicked on that on accident, my bad. For carbohydrates, the answer is going to be saccharides. Now, this is very important, and this is something that I noticed that you guys were messing up on. So I want you to take note of this. The official name is called saccharide. Saccharide. So let's take that answer from earlier. We want one saccharide. So let's put mono in front of it. Okay, because mono means one. So one saccharide is a monosaccharide. But if I put a bunch of saccharides together, what would that be? Let's go back up and look. What would a bunch of saccharides be? It'd be a polysaccharide. Now, I specifically put saccharide because that is the academic language that they expect you to know. That is the academic language they expect you to know. So a saccharide is the monomer of a carbohydrate. When it's only one, it's a monosaccharide. When it's a lot of them, it's a polysaccharide. For lipids, triglycerol and fatty acids. And the easiest way to remember that, lipids are fats, fatty acid. Lipids are fat, fatty acids. For protein, we have amino acids. Amino acids, proteins, AA, proteins, AA, proteins, AA, proteins, AA, amino acids. Now, the last one that should be the easiest is nucleic acids. And that one's going to be nucleotides. Those are the monomers of nucleic acids. The best way to remember that, nucle, N-U-C-L-E, is the same on both of these, nucle. They both start with the first 5 letters that are the same. Now, we're going to go down to this next question. We got to match the acronym with the biomolecule. Match the acronym with the biomolecule. So we have cho, cho, chon, chomp. Cho, cho, chon, chomp. Cho, cho, chon, chomp. Cho, cho, chon, chomp. The best way to remember it is that cho goes with carbohydrates. The other cho goes with lipids. Chon, C-H-O-N, goes with proteins. And chomp, C-H-O-M-P, goes with nucleic acids. So only the carbohydrates and the lipids have the first two that are the same. Proteins are going to be CHON, which is going to be right here, chon. They're going to have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Nucleic acids are going to be CHOMP, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus. Now, carbohydrates and lipids are the one where people get confused. But look what I put right here. CHON, ring shape. And with that, we're going to know that it's a carbohydrate because carbohydrates are the only ones that have rings, that are specifically and exclusively only rings. We have those hexagons and those pentagons. And these hexagons and pentagons will only have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in them. Lipids have CHO, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen also, but it's not in a ring shape. It actually looks like a long squiggle. Looks like a long squiggle. While the carbohydrates have their carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a ring shape. So for the carbohydrates, it's going to be this one. For the lipids, it's going to be this one. And then for the proteins, it's going to be the one at the end. And the nucleic acids, it is this one. Next up, mass is the function of each biomolecule. So each one of them has a specific job. So you need to remember that carbohydrates are going to be things like our bread, our bananas, or potatoes, our sugar. And sugar is short-term energy, short-term energy. That's how we remember carbohydrates, as short-term energy. Lipids, on the other hand, are long-term energy. This is energy that's going to be in your body for quite a while because it's fat, and fat is hard to lose. Now, proteins have a bunch of different jobs, but in this course, we only care about speeding up chemical reactions. That's all we care about right now. So you need to remember that proteins speed up chemical reactions. That's their job. In nucleic acids, DNA, all that good stuff, it's genetic information. It's the genetic information. It's a blueprint to you. Now, which of the following has more energy in it? Carbohydrates or lipids? This might be a tricky question, but the answer is actually lipids. The reason why is that lipids have more energy per gram than carbohydrates. So they have more energy, but it's harder to get that energy out of them because it's harder to break a fat than it is to get out carbohydrate. But if I was to ask you specifically which one has more, it's definitely lipids. Lipids has more energy in them than carbohydrates. But since carbohydrates are so much easier to get, we usually prefer carbohydrates. Now over here we have a ring and another ring. For image one, is this a polymer, a monomer or a polymer, and how do you know? What kind of biomolecule is this, and how do you know? Name the specific essential elements in this molecule. Okay, so I see one ring, and then I see a second ring. So immediately, I know this is a polymer. I know this is a polymer because if it was a monomer, it would be one building block. We have two building blocks here, so this is a polymer right away because it's more than one. Poly means many, and two is many. What kind of biomolecule is this? This is definitely 150% a carbohydrate because when we went over here, carbohydrates have the ring shape. Carbohydrates have the ring shape, and this is specifically and exclusively a ring. And then the last one says, what about the essential elements? Well, we can see that there's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen there, which means we only had two options, lipids and carbohydrates. But because of the fact that it has a ring shape, we know 100% that this is definitely a carbohydrate. So there you go. That's the important thing to get out of this one. Let's go down. Starch is considered a carbohydrate. When it gets broken down, what does it become? Use the terms monomers and glucose or saccharides. Okay, so we have starch. It's a polymer of carbohydrates. And we just looked at this polymer up here. So that means that starch is going to be a bunch of rings put together. A bunch of rings that are connected, meaning that when it gets broken down, it's going to be broken down back into its own monomers, its own glucose molecules, its own monomers, or it's going to be broken down into monomers of saccharides, or monomers of glucose, whichever one. But both of these terms are academically accurate. Both of them are academically accurate. because we're breaking down the big polymer back into the individual monomers, which can be either glucose or saccharides, depending on which academic term you want to use. Now, starch is one form of a polymer of carbohydrate. We typically call a polymer of carbohydrates as sugar. Why do plants produce these polymers of sugar? Okay, pretty cool question. Pretty cool question. So, plants produce the sugars. Plants produce the sugars, but why do they produce the sugars? That's a very good and important question. So, what could be the use of sugar? Okay, well, plants produce sugar for a variety of reasons. One, it's their main food source. They produce that sugar so that eventually it can be broken down and be given energy back to the plant. They also use it for structural things. Remember, that's basically the only thing plants can produce. So they use it to build their bodies up and to energize their bodies. They use it to build their bodies up and to energize their bodies. And we're going to go to this question now. The formula of photosynthesis is 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus sunlight is going to give us C6H12O6, otherwise known as glucose, plus 6 O2, otherwise known as oxygen. During what time of the day would the most photosynthesis occur? Use evidence from the formula. This one's pretty simple. We actually went over it in class. Photosynthesis would occur mostly during the day. The reason why is because you need sunlight to break water. And I want to emphasize that right now. You need sunlight to break down water. Without sunlight there to break down the water, you actually are not going to produce your sorry, my mouth is a little bit dry. You're actually not going to produce your glucose. You need sunlight to break down that water because when it breaks down the water, the hydrogen goes ahead and combines with the carbon dioxide, and then the oxygen that's left over is going to go to the side, along with a little bit of oxygen from the carbon dioxide. But still, you do not break that water apart, you cannot create glucose. So my answer would be during the day, because that's when you actually have sunlight present. Now, why do heterotrophs have to consume autotrophs? Heterotrophs, and autotrophs. So autotrophs, I know for a fact, I'm going to break down that word. Auto means to do implicitly, to do on its own. So autotrophs make their own food. We have examples of autotrophs. If you look outside your window, you're going to see them everywhere. Plants. Plants are going to be our autotrophs. And heterotrophs are different because hetero means different. So if autotrophs make their own food, heterotrophs do not make their own food because that's different than making your own food. So a heterotroph has to eat an autotroph. We know that. But what do autotrophs make inside of them? What do plants make that animals cannot? And it starts with a G, and it's kind of delicious, and it's right over here. And it's called glucose. So heterotrophs have to consume autotrophs in order to get the glucose because heterotrophs still do cellular respiration. And cellular respiration requires glucose, which heterotrophs cannot make. They only acquire it by consuming the autotrophs, by consuming plants. All right, but with that being said, guys, that is it for the first section on biomolecules. I will be seeing you guys in the next section. Bye, guys.